Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. And I'm George Binns. And the guest this evening is Andrew DeFranza, Executive Director of Harbor Lights, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Thanks for having me, George.
Yeah. And you've been pretty active around town. Lately, I guess the big deal is just up the street from us. There's really a mixed settlement going in.
Mm-hmm.
And there was going to be a raffle to see who gets in.
Mm-hmm.
That been held yet?
No, so the lottery for Anchor Point Phase 1 is going to be Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay.
March 15th, but we stopped taking applications on March 1st.
Okay.
So we got about 583 applications for 38 homes.
Pretty popular place.
Turned out to be, yes.
Yeah. And I guess the question is, when do they move in?
Well, that'll be somewhat related to construction, but we're trying to get people in July.
Yeah.
So I expect they'll start moving in July, but probably some will be in August as well. Hopefully before school starts, so people can get settled.
Yeah, so you'll be totally full by the end of the summer for
Right.
sure. Yeah.
That's right.
That's great. That's a fantastic one. The thing I really I watched the show with you and Walt. You talking about it, and the thing that impressed me was you've got a variation in qualifications. So it's not all just one particular situation.
Right.
And I think you made the point during that show, and I think it needs to be emphasized, that there are a lot of people in Beverly of different kinds of income. And it's not necessarily a place for them. And they get cut out because they're making too much, but not enough.
Right.
So this particular exercise, you address that situation.
Yeah, there are still some gaps in the system, but it does do the job if you accept, which I think we should, the idea that there's a natural symbiosis in the economy, right? And we depend on people doing all kinds of jobs that I think now the language over the last couple of years we've sort of branded as essential, different kinds of things that I would view as essential, anything you depend on.
Yeah.
And so we all are depending upon people across the income spectrum. But the challenge with that is if you are doing some of the essential work, for example, daycare or caring for seniors or working at with food, all those folks, their incomes are not sufficient to meet market rents. And so this particular building, Anchor Point, has two tiers. So it has a tier of much lower income folks, below $40,000 a year, which is a lot of workers.
Yeah.
And then it has a tier that's for a family of four, really kind of upper 50s to, it can really go all the way up to the upper 80s. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty broad, you cover a lot of different jobs that way.
Yeah.
Teachers, all kinds of people.
Well, that gets to be the problem that I think Beverly's facing, like a lot of other communities, that there are people who are doing, as you said, lots of different jobs, getting different incomes,
Right.
and the situation is coming down to one with the pressure from the state for TOD,
Yes.
transient-oriented development. I got to keep remembering what that is. That we're going to get imported a bunch of people who can't afford to live in Boston. And the net result is the people that are doing the service jobs especially, they can't afford to live in Beverly. They've got to live someplace else.
Right.
So it gets to be a strange community when it's almost like a theme park. That if you have enough money to stay here, you got to work someplace else to earn that kind of money. And if you're working here, you got to go live someplace else.
Yeah, interesting.
And-
Sorry, go ahead.
And so we've gotten into this discussion a couple of times, and I like to push my theme of complete cities. Anybody that works here can afford to live here.
Yeah, speaking my language.
Yeah. So you get down to the situation, well, how do you provide for housing for people that are not dragging down 100 G's and better?
Right. Which I think we should acknowledge is a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right. We depend on a lot of jobs or people that do jobs that make less than that amount of money.
Yeah.
And so how is that? I totally agree with you. There has to be a coherence to the community that people If you're working here providing an essential service, it should be possible that you can live here. Not that every house or every home has to make that possible, but it has to be enough to make it viable. And it's really, and part of the challenge is that it's regional in its nature, right? We like to think, I'm a Beverly guy, you're a Beverly person. We think in terms of municipal borders, but there's lots of things about public infrastructure and public health that don't abide by municipal borders, and one of those is the housing economy.
Yeah.
To your point, then it'll roll downhill. People get pushed farther and farther out, which is ironic because there was a time when people would get pushed into the cities, and now they get pushed out of the cities.
Yeah.
And they're really constantly, people who are more economically vulnerable, constantly at the whim of people who are more economically powerful, unless we do some things about it, like create other alternate options.
Well, one of the things that impressed me, I was reading an article on the line on the web, and there was a German firm that's come up with a 3D printing machine, and they can print a single-family, two-story house in 25 hours.
It's crazy.
It's it almost sounds like it's impossible, but they're doing it. And the neat thing about that particular one I liked is people are inside the house as it's being built around them.
Yeah.
And they're putting in all the fixtures and connections and stuff that you need to electricity, water, and all that.
Right.
So the technology is to the point of it's starting to cut the construction costs.
Yes.
Modular housing does the same thing. So we're down to a problem of where do you get the land?
Right, and not just the land, the land cost, which I think is where you're going, which is entirely relevant, but also the allowable use of the land. So the zoning, which is determining what you can do on land, is dramatically influences what's going to get built and what's not going to get built.
Well, that's another article that I've been stumbling through, that theoretically, an open economy, a classic system, the prices should adjust
It should.
to fit whatever the market demands. And if there was a reasonable way to produce affordable housing, then somebody would do it.
Absolutely.
But the situation has come down to what you're alluding to is, well, you can't do that here.
Right.
And when I look at my neighborhood, an acre of land, according to the city's assessment, is worth about $1 million. And it's awful hard to put a lot of small houses on $1 million worth of land. And the reason it's that expensive is because that's what the zoning calls for.
Right.
It's got to be single family.
Right.
And it's got to be 10,000 square feet.
That's right.
So one of the problems we stumble into, as you mentioned, is how do we get to the point where we can zone for something different? And I think I sent you an email about Minneapolis.
Yeah.
They finally bit the bullet and said, no more single-family zoning.
Right.
That's a major change.
Yeah.
And that probably will help. But what else does the city need to do to...
Right. Well, certainly you're hitting on it there. It's interesting that Minneapolis is on the cutting edge in that way. You wouldn't maybe expect that, but it is. And so they certainly, what they did is they're removing from the equation, and I like the way you frame that, George, from the economic equation, essentially the manipulation of land value based on a fabricated scarcity.
Yeah.
Right. So zoning essentially has nothing to do with the substance of reality about how much land is there.
Yeah.
What it has to do with is we say, well, there's 100 acres here, but you can only use half an acre. So the usable half an acre increases in value based on the fabricated rules. So it is a huge element. Frankly, and I think this is difficult because what happens is you have people who have commodified the value of the limited land opportunities. Right, all of us, right? Anybody who owns a house, I own a house, you own a house here. The value of that house is somewhat affected currently based on the rules, and so either by perception or by economics, if you change that at all, people feel like they're losing something that they had.
Yeah.
And so we have to find. It's a political problem. There has to be a way that we say this is bigger than just one generation, or one set of individuals, because if we don't have the political will to make changes to the zoning laws to allow for more land use, we will continue to have a very simple supply and demand problem.
Yeah.
And the alternative to this, of course, you and I have joked before, is if we're paying $10 for a cup of coffee and a donut,
Yeah.
we could just pay people more, and then the market would adjust. But
Yeah.
we don't want to do that. So we find some ways to compress costs for consumers, but the bearing of that cost goes somewhere. And in this case, it goes to the employees who are doing jobs that they can't earn market rent. They must then depend on all of these other public systems to make it possible for them to survive, not even to thrive, just to survive.
Yeah.
But then we benefit from that based on their lower wages.
Well, we think we are, but it's coming out of my back pocket as the taxes.
Absolutely, and wider social pain and problems, right?
Yeah.
There's no free lunch, right, as we say. So
Yeah.
you can't oppress a group and expect that to go well.
So we get to the situation, I guess, where if Beverly steps up and says, okay,
Yes.
we're going to eliminate single-family
Yeah.
zoning, that'd be nice, except the communities around us
Right.
are still the same old,
That's right.
and the problem doesn't go away.
Right.
So it gets to be a situation where it's got to be bigger than a city.
Agreed.
Minneapolis is a huge city compared to Beverly.
Right.
So they can make a big change
Right.
by just making a unilateral decision for themselves.
Right.
But for cities like Beverly or the rest of Essex County, where
Too
you
small.
got a common problem, it's got to be something at the state level to
Agreed.
say that, hey, enough is enough.
Right. Because it's also politically impossible for the local officials to take a stand like that because it creates so much political risk for them.
Yeah.
Because it's really the people making the decision are going to be the people who feel like they have a benefit or a loss around a certain area. So they'll hold those people accountable.
Yeah.
You have to aggregate the decision, and I agree with you. Which is why the state recently made the move on housing choice and the MBTA zoning rules to create density around MBTA stations.
Yeah.
Everywhere in eastern Massachusetts, essentially.
Yeah.
And that was we were involved in pursuing that and advocating for it. That was a gesture in the direction you're describing, which is a shared, diffuse ability to create more housing and more places.
And there's no unique pain. It's
That's right.
diverse.
It's diffused across the region.
Yeah.
So it's not that the public officials in Beverly have to bear the scrutiny of the community that doesn't like it. It's really at a state level, and so you diffuse the risk.
Well, we got a couple of issues going on in Beverly right now. There's a lot of discussion about the Bass River overlay.
Yes.
You guys involved in this at all?
We're not. I'm a Ward 2 person, so I'm involved in the sense that I live very close to that.
Yeah.
We are certainly keeping our eyes on it and have opinions on it. We'll be interested to see if there's land that becomes available down there. I understand why that's being pursued, because the use, we've evolved and the use is different, and we probably want to do something different there. As somebody who had birthday parties for my kids at the Bolomat when it was still functional, I feel nostalgic about that too. But it's a different time, and we need a different use. But I understand also that people are concerned about the impact. So there's going to have to be a thoughtful way to do something really good there that advances the community's goals, and some of that's going to be
It gets
housing.
to the issue. In most of these developments, there is a requirement that there's a certain amount of
Yes.
was a schedule
Inclusionary zoning.
inclusionary zoning.
Yeah.
So therefore, they should be building affordable housing in there.
Yes.
And that's different from housing that people can afford.
Right.
Because
It could be the
it's,
same, but
it's
yes.
through the state formula.
Right. Right.
Now, the question usually comes down to is most of the developers, instead of including those houses, they pay a fee to, what's the fee?
They can pay a fee to the affordable housing
Affordable
trust.
housing, yeah.
Right, and buy it out, essentially.
So they can buy out of it.
Yep.
But that gets us back to the problem of, okay, you got some money,
Yes.
or somebody in that organization's got some money
Right.
to buy something, but where can you find some land?
Right. Right. And I mean, we're fortunate in Beverly in that we've had enough things to do to deploy the funds. But there are some communities where they're just sitting on cash that they can't use, to your point, because they can't either find land or they can't find land that they can use to permit.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the overlay, which I think exactly to your point, George, is a good one, is if an overlay gets made, we will have the ability as a city in that process to determine the affordability ratio, meaning how many units are affordable, and the income levels. So we're bound to the state's guidance about what has to be affordable, but we can make our affordability requirements in that zone lower. We don't have to just take the state's maximum. A lot of communities think, well, the state says it's 80% of median, which is for a family of four is like $90,000 or more.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that. We could say we want 15% of the units affordable at 60% of median, and that would get us to a different tier. We have the power to do that.
Yeah.
So in the overlay process, that'll be a huge question, and we'll certainly have something to say about that.
Well, that's good. So then it ends up like the anchor point up the street from here, that you can have gradations
You can have
in
tiers, yes.
the different categories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they also we don't have to allow the buyout. The buyout provision, which means you can put the affordable housing somewhere else, that's also up to us. That's in our inclusionary zoning now. It could be removed or left. Similar in the Bass River overlay, it could be in there or it could be not in there.
Yeah.
That decision will have to get made in the regulations in the overlay.
Oh, okay. So I saw the article in the paper about the community meeting with the Ward 2 Civic Association and the mayor, and I guess there was also an issue in there that shows up that the people in Ward 2 want to have recreational kind of facilities or something other than just all apartment houses and condos.
Right.
And that gets into the other conflict in this game of you want to have space for housing, but at the same time, there's another group of people that want to have space for recreation.
Sure.
And that is a conflict. And you get back to the question of what is the character of Beverly?
Yes.
Is it something dense like a downtown Boston or Roxbury or something like that, or is it more open like Lincoln?
Right. Yeah, what I've loved about Beverly since I've been here is that it felt to me like, it's funny because you mentioned it earlier in the conversation, Beverly's always felt to me like a place that a lot of different people could be. Because we have very dense sections that if you just took it, it could look like any city, could look like parts of Boston.
Yeah.
And then we have very diffuse, broad, elegant home sections. So it felt to me like a place that anybody could be in the wider city of Beverly, which I think is one of our strengths. I wouldn't want to be sort of all one way or all the other. So that at some level, we do still have decision-making power. But I agree with you on the open space provision and recreation, which we know more than ever in the last couple of years how important it is to be able to get outside and do things. I think whatever happens on the Bass River is going to have to incorporate some amount of housing and some amount of public access and public recreation space, particularly access to the water, to the river. I think that's a common good we could achieve as a part of the process if we're smart about it.
Yeah, and I guess we got to resolve the issue about dredging the harbor and the bay and the Bass River.
Yes.
And that thing blew up on the city when somebody decided that,
that was hard.
well, you can't really dump that stuff out in the ocean. It's that bad.
Right.
It's that bad.
Right.
It's funny stuff.
Yeah.
So you get into some of these issues, I guess, of how do we make these changes? How do we get a consensus?
Right.
And how much of this is up to the city council, and who else gets involved in these decisions, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate to have a really thoughtful set of elected officials and really good staff. We're big enough as a city to have good professionals. A lot of the communities we work with, it's hard for them to have that. So the planning department and others are really quite good, and so we're blessed in that way. So it is up to the city council has to approve any zoning changes, and so they do have a lot of power in that area.
Yeah.
But the mayor also has significant power around leadership, which he's been very good about on the affordable housing side, Briscoe School, Anchor Point, et cetera. But to your point about consensus, I think that's the harder wrinkle. What are we after? We had that housing production plan from a couple of years ago, that we're looking at, and then COVID hit. Is it still, is that still relevant to us? Has it changed? How's it going to influence our decision making?
Yeah, I have to go back and revisit
We should go back and revisit it, yeah.
Yeah. And so you get into some of these other issues, too, about what else are you guys doing?
Yeah, we have a lot of balls in the air at the moment. So Anchor Point 1, as you mentioned, is under construction. If anybody is driving by the high school, they'll see it there.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. The brick is going on the lower level today. I saw it, so we're really excited about that. Groom Construction, Samasco and Burbridge, our architects, doing a really great job. Some challenges up there with construction cost, just like everything. Supply
yeah.
chain, very serious. So we're a little worried about that. Costs are going up. Briscoe, we're hoping to close on that financing and start construction later this year with our partners at Beacon. Really looking forward to that. A lot of people, I think, interested in that project. And then we have funding application in front of the state for Anchor Point 2, which will be the next phase. Some really good news came
Where's
out.
Anchor Point 2 going to be?
Anchor Point 2 will be right next to Anchor Point 1.
Okay.
So it was permitted at one time, but it was two different buildings.
Okay.
There's an easement up there for some utilities, so that splits the two buildings.
Okay.
And then we're philanthropically raising money for a community center building on that same site. And yesterday we got news that Congressman Moulton had an earmark for the Lighthouse Center, which is what that building is called, in the federal budget, and apparently it survived the cuts and made the budget yesterday. So we're hoping that's going to go.
Yeah.
And we still have some other stuff. We're going to start a project in Rockport this spring. We're waiting to hear about the funding in Wenham, which has been going a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And just yesterday we submitted a permit application in Hamilton for a 45
Oh, you're
unit
busy,
building.
little beaver, aren't you?
I am. They say yes. I like to chew on things. This table,
Yeah.
maybe, who knows?
So you got a lot to go for, yeah.
Yes.
And I guess part of the issue keeps coming back to how do you convince the natives that this stuff is good? I think this is one of the problems that
Yeah.
people don't want to talk about. There's too many episodes of Cabrini Green and Igor Pruitt and a few of these other grandiose plans that they didn't quite turn out right.
Right.
And one of the issues I think that affects them is who's running the show.
Yes.
And Columbia Point got into that predicament also.
Yep.
And Columbia Point seemed to have gotten saved when the state got out of the business and got a private firm to run it, organize it.
Right.
So how does Arborlight fit into that? Are you a private firm? Are you part of a government? Where do you...
Yeah, so we're private, but we're nonprofit. So that's sort of the slice that we're in. Interestingly enough, Beacon, who's our partner at Briscoe, is private and for-profit. So all of us use public money of one sort or another to make the projects work. But we're sort of our advantage is we're private and nonprofit, and we're geographically local. So in terms of accountability, I think that does tend to comfort people that we're around. They know we're around. Our staff, our employees, our residents, everybody's local. Our board.
So when you say local, it's what, just essentially Essex County?
Yeah, we don't even do all of Essex County. We're sort of from Lynn to Rockport, though we have been asked lately to go a little farther north and a little farther west. Sometimes communities are looking for help, and that does happen to us. But it does, our proximity and the fact that we're around and have been around a long time does tend to help build confidence. And I do think a lot of what builds confidence is people realizing that the workers that they depend on, or the seniors that were the workers, in order for them to be in the communities or stay in the communities, we have to create housing of this type. The market is not going to do it. And so they are more confident when they realize somebody they care about or rely on is a person that would be eligible. And we're trying to get that message out. The people that you care about and rely on need places to live, and these are some of them.
Yeah. The other issue I think that you and I thrashed over a while back was you just opened up a new facility that is designed in 6 two-bedroom apartments kind of thing.
Yep.
And that was with money that was set aside from...
It was.
So in that particular case, to me it looks like it was a good fit. You got some money, you found some land, you put up a multifamily house. And to satisfy, I think, Tim Flaherty, who likes to maintain the character of the city, it's a clapboard city kind of thing. Okay, it looks like it fit, even though it's very contemporary in appearance. But you have more problems with that, I guess you're telling me.
Yeah, it turned out to be really good the way it worked. I think the challenge with that type of a building is it's very difficult to function at that scale because it's only 6 units.
Yeah.
The state has a program for it, so it is possible, but it's very difficult. And
What do you mean by very difficult?
I could build 6 units or 60 units, and it's the same amount of work.
Okay.
But the economics.
You're talking from your
Yeah.
level. Okay.
Yeah, at our level.
Okay. Yeah.
So the economics are much harder at 6 units than at 60.
Yeah.
So your margin for error, if something goes wrong, which something always goes wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Or if you have any trouble with permitting, the beauty of that one is this lot was already permitted when we got it.
Okay.
So it was fast. So if it's going to be small, it has to be fast and no problems.
Yeah.
But you're always going to have something show up. So we'd rather have something larger because then you can weather the storm a little better.
Well, we're back to the Igor Pruitt kind of thing that you get larger, people start to get nervous about
Yeah.
what's this thing going to turn into.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and our sizes are generally pretty good. I mean, large at this point is like 40 or 50,
okay, so that's
which is,
your break point.
yeah,
Once you get to 40 or 50,
yeah,
the level of effort you've got to put in to make it happen
yeah,
is worth doing it, as opposed to
that's right.
you get a better bang for your buck. Is essentially what it comes
Yeah,
down
your
to.
efficiencies are much better.
Yeah.
But you're not really, the funding sources won't really let you do much more than that. I mean, we're doing 91 at Briscoe.
Yeah.
But partially that's because it's a historic building and, it's got some interesting elements to it that makes that happen. But yeah, you couldn't build, Cabrini Green was hundreds and hundreds of units,
yeah.
right? You can't even do that anymore.
No.
So I think people are a little bit, there's a little bit of a historic concern that doesn't play through to now, and some of that also there's a lot of question around racial segregation and equity questions around the historic public housing and the way that got populated and who got to live where, and there's a whole bunch in that soup.
Yeah, that then went downhill fast for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
And speaking of go fast, we've been through a half hour already.
Have we? See,
Yeah.
your company is so delightful. I didn't even notice, George.
So, again, I would like to have you come back and tell us some more.
Sure.
Once Briscoe is underway and some of these other projects are underway. And I guess the question really comes down to was, how do we get the message out that we really need to do something about zoning? And some of these alternative dwelling units is another one of these buzzwords that's going around and
Yep, it's a
needs
good
to
idea.
be considered.
Agreed.
Because a lot of people, I think, especially in 3rd Ward 3, maybe Ward 4, in situations where somebody's getting old and retiring,
Yes.
and they've got a big house, and I wanted something smaller, but I want to stay in Beverly.
Yeah.
So I think these are some of the issues I think we need to
That's right.
talk about next time.
Okay.
And thanks again for joining us, and
You bet.
I appreciate it. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us this evening. And as I always say at the end, if you've got a different opinion or a similar opinion and you want to get your voice at the table, we can always make room for you. And thanks again, and we'll see you next time.